Good afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. My name is Blanca Torres, and I'm a CHCI Public Policy Fellow. I am delighted to be with you today for the Immigrant Talent, Bridging the Labor Gap, and Fast Tracking Work Permit session. It is no secret that the U.S. immigration system is a complex web that ensures only a limited few have the ability to obtain EAD cards. And even then, the process is slow and extensive. I myself am a proud dreamer from Honduras, and it is thanks to a work permit that I'm here today to present this panel. It is my honor to introduce our session chair, Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia. Representative Garcia has proudly represented the 4th Congressional District of Illinois since 2019. He currently serves as a member of the influential Financial Services Committee, Natural Resources Committee, and the Transportation and Infrastructures Committee. It is now my pleasure to introduce Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia for our opening remarks.
Buenas tardes and good afternoon to everyone present in the room. I am delighted to join you all this afternoon, and I want to say thank you to the wonderful fellows that I had a chance to chat with, take a photo with, and send well wishes to their parents back home as well. So that was quite moving. I'm Congressman Chuy Garcia. I represent the 4th District of Illinois, and delighted to be here with all of you. I want to thank, of course, my longtime acquaintance, and I think he's a friend. I consider him a friend. I hope that he, as a journalist, can also consider me a friend. We know each other since 1986. He's been a wonderful journalist, and of course, and that's Ray Suarez. And of course, I want to thank CHCI for organizing this conversation with such incredible panelists on this most important topic. I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, and we are in a space that becomes a church on weekends, I'm told, but we must continue to fight for a more just immigration system in our country. And that includes continuing to advocate on behalf of communities for expanded work permits across our country. Even though the prospects for immigration reform do not look at all possible over the next several months and the end of the year, because we have a divided Congress with Republicans seeking to pass horrible anti-immigrant bills, and I don't say that to make a partisan statement, but it is a fact. Our best shot at delivering change right now is via executive action. It's our best and only shot, and indicative of the type of bills that are being considered between today and tomorrow. For example, there will be a vote on the floor on a bill that seeks to limit voting, counting people in the census to only U.S. citizens, excluding a whole swath of millions of people who are undocumented or have other statuses as well. I've been working with my colleagues in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, in the Progressive Caucus as well, along with labor, community, and business leaders to urge President Biden to take the actions our communities need. And our panelists today will make the case on why this continues to be so important for so many communities. Has the president done everything that we've urged him to do? No. But have we made progress? We have. He's heeded our calls on extending and redesignating temporary protective status. He's heeded our call on expanding access to health care for DACA holders. And just recently, he heeded our calls to provide work authorization to 800,000 immigrants whose renewal applications were stuck in processing delays. But why are we focused on work permits, especially people like myself, an immigrant, someone who lives in an immigrant community in Chicago? Why are we focused when our line has been saying, let's pass large immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship? At the core, in these times, expanding access to work permits is a matter of economic justice and opportunity for the nation. It's about keeping families together and keeping people safe. It's about expanding opportunity and stability. For decades, my constituents, our friends, neighbors, and loved ones have paid taxes and contributed to our communities. They've opened up businesses, they've hired people, they've made local and state economies thrive. Yet, they've done so without the stability of even a work permit or peace of mind. They've raised families without the peace of mind of working con papeles, with papers, much less a path to citizenship. So this issue is personal to us, and that's why we're fighting for work permits for all, whether you arrived days ago or decades ago. But there's also a national economic imperative. Expanding access to work permits is good economic policy. Immigrants drive our economy, and you'll hear more about that. They keep it running. And we need to keep impressing this point upon the president and this Congress and other elected leaders. We need to continue raising awareness of the tremendous positive and impact that immigrants have in our communities and our economy. And you have my word that I will continue to fight this fight. Just recently, I led a letter with my colleagues, Representative Espaillat, who was to do the opening for this panel, and Representative Correa from coast to coast, including Chicago's Gold Coast. That's why they call us the Three Amigos in Congress. And we urge the president to create 3 new work permit programs for undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens. Poll that. It has overwhelming support. Dreamers who are ineligible for DACA due to age. Poll that one as well. And long-term workers who have contributed and paid taxes for years and abided by the laws of this country. Yes, these are incremental changes. They are not the full set of policy changes we need to see, but they are incredibly important actions that can be taken now. I thank you all for being here. And I want to just remind you that DACA only came about on an election year in June of 2012, right before the general election. Does that scenario sound familiar? Of course, I look forward to working with all of you and to address the system that addresses, to create a new immigration system that addresses the root causes of what drives people to our border and ensures that they are treated with dignity and opportunity once they arrive in our communities. Thank you so much for being here for this wonderful panel. Thanks.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ray Suarez. Ray Suarez is the author of the new book, We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century and the Modern Era of Immigration to the U.S. He is host of the radio program and podcast On Shifting Grounds from KQED-FM in San Francisco and heard on public radio stations across the country. Please welcome Ray Suarez.
Thank you. It is particularly appropriate that our session is opened by people who live into the theme of our conversation today, the 200%. Congressman Garcia, both fully a proud son of Durango and a proud son of Little Village in Chicago. One does not negate or change the other. One only enhances the other. And, of course, as she mentioned, a DACA kid, a living embodiment of the challenges that we're going to be talking about during our panel. Just in the last couple of months, immigration has moved from being one of the things we argue about, a long list of things we argue about, to being, according to pollsters, one of the 1, 2, or 3 top issues for voters in the coming election later this year. We have a bad habit in the United States of portraying immigration, especially in the modern era, as a cost and rarely as a benefit. And as we'll discuss in our panel today, it's a lot more nuanced picture than that. There's a dimension of social utility, just doing what would be useful for the country. Of course, there's a dimension of policy, politics, and the black and white letters of law books and how we administer the law, both at the border and in the streets of our country from coast to coast. I have a terrific panel lined up today to hit on various aspects of our challenges going forward. Leah Parada, the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Immigration Hub. Silva Matema, Director for Immigration Policy at the Center for American Progress. And Jack Malde, Senior Policy Analyst in the Economic Policy Program at the Bipartisan Policy Center. As has been mentioned many times, there are a lot of job openings in the country, and at a time of historic low unemployment, the longest string of sub 4% unemployment in 6 decades, it's not like we have an enormous surplus of workers. Jack, set the table for us a little bit. Give us some of the big data sets that would guide people's thinking on what we need and when we need it.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Well, Ray mentioned that we have more vacancies than unemployed people. So we have, according to the latest data, 8.5 million job openings and only 6.5 million unemployed workers. So that's a gap of 2 million. And why do we have such a gap? Well, at the core of the issue is our aging population. So we have a growing share of our population over the age of 65, retired, they're not working, and a declining share of our population is in that prime working age between the ages of 25 and 54. And this is for various reasons. People are living longer. We have the aging out of the baby boom generation at the moment. They're going up above the age of 65. And that's really at the heart of the problem. We have very little labor force growth from US-born workers, and that's why we need immigration to fill the gap. And this problem is not going away. We're going to continue to see the aging of the population. And the Congressional Budget Office actually forecasts that by 2040, without immigration, we can expect to see population decline. And what that means, it means slowing economic growth, it means slowing technological innovation. And so we're becoming more and more reliant on immigration to bolster our labor force, to fill these open vacancies, to pay taxes and support a growing share of people who are dependent on federal benefits. Social Security is set to go insolvent by 2033. So we really need to increase the number of people coming in who work and pay taxes. And at the heart of that, I think it is, we also need to look at the work permits. People are here, but a lot of them are undocumented. A lot of them don't have the labor market opportunities they need. So we do also need to think about what the Biden administration can do to grant work permits to undocumented spouses, to dreamers. And that would really allow people to access greater opportunities and actually pay more in taxes ultimately. So I think that's really the core of the problem is our aging population. And we're becoming more and more dependent on immigration to really fill the gap.
As the Congressman mentioned in his opening remarks, work permits, just the legal ability to work, ends up being a critical part of this conversation. As Southern governors have shipped people north in kind of a stunt, using humans as stunt objects, they have pooled up in places, and the mayors in many of these cities have said, look, if you just let them work, they'll almost immediately find work. Then people who don't want immigration say, well, that means they're taking jobs away from native-born workers. Silva, what do we know about that? Is this a zero-sum game? Is someone who comes across the border and gets a job doing something that hampers the economic prospects of a native-born worker?
Well, going back to my economics 101 class, when you add people to a population, it doesn't really make a zero-sum game. There's a pizza, the pie just gets bigger, the economy grows, it's not like you add people to it and they take it away from you. But I really want to take this opportunity to really, we talked about the role immigrants play in the U.S. labor market, and I think I'd want to focus us back there, because that really shows like how, especially like, and I will use Latino workers very generally, but really understanding that Latino workers is a blanket term. They're very, very diverse in immigration status, in having work permits or not, in demographic profiles, when they came from, where they came from, all sorts of things. But, and some of the things that I've talked about will apply to all immigrants. And many of the barriers and challenges that we will probably talk about will apply very specifically to undocumented immigrants, as well as the new arrivals that you're seeing today. But focusing back on the role of especially Latino workers. And I work in data, I listen to this all the time, but when I actually dug into like the actual numbers, what I really want you to take away is that it's very powerful. Like, and I will look at the numbers so that I don't mess this up. There are 32 million Latino workers in 2023, and by 2030 it's supposed to go to like 35.9, and this is all government data, it's all out there. Latino workers will account for 1 out of 5 workers, labor force, by 2030, and they will account for 78% of net new workers. So that's where the growth is going to come from in the next decade or so. And then I think what really struck me was that I knew already like that they play an outsized role in the US economy. What really struck me was in some of these occupational sectors, Latinos were overrepresented, like 40% of the entire labor force in some of these occupation sectors like fishing and forestry, building and grounds, maintenance, construction, extraction. 40% of the labor was Latino workers. And that is not a funny statistic, it's very grave. And you need to kind of think about like what barriers, what challenges are these workers facing to make sure that, okay, what can we do to make sure we can go forward so that when you really tackle the challenges, barriers for this population, you will be tackling challenges for others as well to really lift up the economy, entire economy. And one thing, and I will go back to what Jack said, these are some of the occupations that they are concentrated in are also the ones that are going to see the most growth in 2030, like in 10 or so years. So, we do need these workers to fulfill those gaps. And it's just, these all demographic shifts and all kinds of shifts, those kind of make it important for us to think about like where we're going and what we need to make sure to make sure that these workers are able to contribute to the country like sustainably and with dignity as well. And some occupations like in extraction and construction, the representation goes as high as like 70%, 60%. So that's very, very powerful, and I think I would want you to take that away from this. And I don't think it's, again, going back to the pie question, it's not really taking it away. It's really making sure that people are able to make sure that people are able to do these jobs that are, sometimes low wages, like many times low wages, and many times undervalued. Increase the value of these jobs, make it better, have health insurance or labor protections, those kind of things, and make it attractive for everybody. And this is a market economy, so everybody gets to get a chance to apply for those jobs. So,
just to be sure I understand you, the economic prospects of native-born workers are enhanced by immigrant workers.
Totally, and many times it's like supporting too. Like it's really supportive. It complements each other. I think that's what another economics class would tell you, that they just lift each other up many, many times.
Leah, behind these big statistics, these great big numbers, these overrepresentations in certain job sectors, there are human beings. I was at a dinner in Orange County, California, with a woman who missed getting DACA by 91 days. She was 91 days too old. She still works. She still drives. She still lives in the economy. Is the complexity and the challenge and the time it takes hampering the lives of even people who are working?
That's a great question. And I'm going to take a step back and say there's alphabet soup programs that the administration has to provide work permits, such as DACA does, such as temporary protected status does. So I want to circle back to what Congressman Chuy Garcia said, that we have worked closely with this administration, and places like New York and Chicago have received recent arrivals, and the advocacy in turn has been TPS from folks from Venezuela. What does that actually mean? It means in a certain amount of time someone can give their information to the federal government and receive a work permit and protections from deportation, which unfortunately this young woman did not receive. And so, CAP studies, NILC studies, different surveys of DACA recipients, and they're all my friends as well. I just came from the Senate Judiciary Committee, where my friend Gabby Pacheco is a CEO and leads the largest Dreamer Scholarship program. And she started off and documented, helped create the DACA program, and is now testifying again as a CEO, and she's not the only one. The lives are changed dramatically, and not just, and returning back to what Silva was talking about, anecdotally it's very easy to see how they lift each other up. If you have a head of household that has DACA, that child can go to a different preschool. They can become a homeowner. They then become small business owners. So you're talking about an entire family that is being lifted up, and then you're talking about a community that is then receiving the contributions of that individual, including their taxes. So these statuses are not without flaws. They are temporary. It is simply a work permit. It took DACA recipients, 12 years to now be able to get affordable access to subsidies through the Affordable Care Act. Until today, we pushed for this program for 12 years. So there's a stark difference in what some protections mean versus no protections. And yes, my parents came undocumented, worked for a very long time, bought their first house in Virginia before even getting a green card. So despite it all, they persevere. Is it sufficient? Should it be the status quo? Absolutely not.
A lot of people say, when they hear these moving human stories, I would have more sympathy if they just got online like everybody else. And at this dinner, well, I said to this woman who was 91 days too old to apply for DACA, well, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I think my husband is going to get me legal. He was also at dinner. So I asked him what was up with him. He was 13 years in the process. And when I tell that story, people say, oh, that's an exaggeration. I was talking to an immigrant worker the day before yesterday who's here on an O visa because he can't get another kind of visa. So I said to him, well, why don't you just get into the process for your home country, the country of your birth, and start working toward becoming a legal permanent resident? He happened to come from India. He said the waiting line, this theoretical line that I would get into, is 100 years long. And I said to him, oh, come on, Pranav, you're exaggerating. He said, no, that's not hyperbole. Because of the size of the annual quota, the line is 100 years long. So I said, all right, well, I hope I live long enough to see you get your green card. I don't really. I don't want to be 167 years old. But are we hampering economic results in this country by having a system that's complex, expensive, and hard to work with?
And again, I'm going to be your anecdotes girl, because I work closely with a lot of pre-med UC students who many, when they're graduating, an option that's offered to them is like, you don't have to work in the United States. You are smart, you're competitive, you're accomplished. Do you want to go to Canada? You will have an easier option there. And so it is costing us. Having DACA recipients who are Fulbright scholars or small business owners in this interminable political limbo of what their future looks like depending on who's elected to Congress or who is the president is financially, economically harmful to the individual and to our communities. And you know, you look at this backlog, that's millions of people. And they're like, why don't they get in line? Why don't they do it the right way? There's literally millions of people trying to do it the right way. And when the congressman talked about the dysfunction, it's kind of by design, I would say, because you know, they want to extract their policy agenda to break the logjam, to get those people in the process who have done everything that has been asked of them to do to get into the process, to get their green card, to naturalize.
Comprehensive immigration reform is thrown around as a phrase, but it's like a grand slam home run, taking care of all these different problems in one grab bag full of different legislative initiatives. Are there shorter term, smaller bites that would help the situation as it is right now? Are there things in the pipeline, things that your organizations have proposed that would at least ease some of the challenges we are in right now in 2024, that are also, let me make this harder, politically plausible?
Yeah, well, I think you're right to raise the difficulty of comprehensive immigration reform. It's been impossible. We haven't seen comprehensive immigration reform for decades. Congressman Garcia mentioned that maybe we need to look to executive actions. And I think something that, you know, Congress needs to act. I want to be very clear on that. But there are things that, for example, the Department of Labor can do. We have this thing called the Schedule A shortage occupation list, which is a list of occupations that we have determined are in shortage. We can't find American workers to fill the roles. And if an occupation's on that list, it's a lot easier for businesses to hire foreign talent to fill those roles. At the moment, if an occupation is not on that list, businesses often have to spend over a year trying to demonstrate that they can't find American workers to fill the role. So if we can just update that list, which hasn't been updated for over 30 years, we can really enable businesses to hire foreign talent where they cannot find the American workers they need. So that's something the Department of Labor can do. And I would just like to mention that they are currently seeking input into how the list should be updated. So us at the Bipartisan Policy Center, we will be submitting a comment. But I also want to say that there are things that Congress can do. I think smaller reforms, and we are seeing bipartisan bills introduced. We saw the EAGLE Act in the Senate, which would actually not increase the number of green cards, but it would would reserve some green cards for shortage occupations. So that's a very small but kind of a no-brainer reform that we could do. And we're seeing bipartisanship in the agricultural sector. So the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would grant renewable legal status to many undocumented agricultural workers. So the agricultural sector is hugely dependent on undocumented workers. So I think we do need the administration to look at what they can do, but I would also urge Congress, of course, to look at these smaller reforms that have bipartisan support and that have some potential in the short term.
And I would add that as a former congressional staffer, Congress really only acts when they have a deadline or a cliff. And we expect the Supreme Court to take up the DACA program again in 2025. And were that to be an adverse decision, which it is completely plausible, that would be another opportunity where Congress will feel the pressure to act on legalization, such as happened under Trump and under President Obama as well.
Silva, you were going to say?
Yeah, just to add, I think it is the environment about Congress needing to act and not being able to. That's has been happening for a while, and it's much more true now. And it's scary. It's very, very scary. I think then you wouldn't be able to see those big blanket changes that we know we're so late for, like 40 years late for. And a lot of the problems or challenges that we're seeing now is because the system is so outdated and there are not enough resources. And even if we want to resource some of these agencies, there's no political willpower to want to resource them because the chaos is good for politics. But I think what Jack says, incremental changes, those are probably where we should be looking at, whether through appropriations or making sure smaller things that have big impacts on people's lives, like looking at language access things. We recently started to look at some language access, and it's really hard to argue against. Okay, you need more language access in all these different aspects of the immigration system, and I think that's not a shiny thing to do, but something that really makes sense. And things like that. At CAP, what you're trying to find is actual problems that need sometimes administrative solution or regulatory solution or money solutions or resources solution. So we're trying to find what are those things that we can really lift up so these backlogs can be reduced through maybe digitization or some. And a lot of the administration right now has been doing these modernization of their application processes, and it is showing some results too. If you can just look at the refugee processing, we were really behind. I work a lot in refugees as well. We were really behind after the Trump administration, but now after 4 years, we're finally catching up, and that's because of these modernization and really getting rid of red tapes and making sure that processes make sense. So I think there are a lot of things that you can do that aren't shiny, but will make differences in people's lives.
In the coming months, from now until Election Day, one of the concerns you're going to hear about is for low-wage workers, native-born, low-wage workers. And it will be driven in native-born minority communities, on black radio, in other similar places, that clearing up some of this backlog is going to disadvantage low-wage workers, that it aims at the competition at the bottom of the wage scale. Is there some validity to that concern? Do we know the effect that taking in large numbers of new workers into an urban pool actually has on low-wage workers? Do we even know to address whether that's a legitimate concern or not?
Yeah, well, we have seen a lot of immigration in the past few years. We've seen, for example, the Biden administration with the parole programs. We've seen a lot of people coming into the country. And what we can do, we can look at the data. We can look at what is the unemployment rate for US-born workers. And last year, in 2023, it averaged 3.6%, which is actually the lowest on record. So we saw big influxes of people coming into the country, and we did not see this rise in unemployment for US-born workers. And one of the key reasons for that is because there's complementarity. Immigrants are filling open vacancies, and they're often going into industries that are quite immigrant-driven in themselves. So there's not that competition with the native-born workers. So when you think about industries like agriculture, construction, food services, these are very immigrant-driven industries. So that's where people are taking the open roles. And so the evidence really doesn't show much in the way of competition.
And if I may add, I think the world does not live in a vacuum. We have to make sure that the low-wage work in and of itself is improved as well. Because another statistics I pulled was some of the occupations that Latino workers are concentrated in are also the most dangerous. They experience the highest fatality rates. They experience the most illnesses and injuries related to work. So it needs, yes, immigration policy is one thing, but the labor protections, all of those things need to come hand in hand while you're talking about immigration. So it's a more of a holistic type of view rather than looking at it in silos. It needs to be together.
We have great questions from the floor, so I'll go to them a little early so I can get to more. Luis asks, we're talking here about recent arrivals. What about immigrants who've been married to citizens for 10, 15, 20 years or more, applied for the I-130, got denied, and are stuck in immigration limbo with only a work permit? Is it a widespread problem?
It is a widespread problem and is actually something that the congressman is leading along with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and is actually getting a lot of traction within the White House to offer an opportunity for spouses of U.S. citizens to be able to adjust their status without having to leave the country, having to not risk not being able to return, and you know, giving them some sort of peace of mind while the backlog is processed. And would impact up to 1 million plus families.
1 million plus.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it was that. I knew there were a lot of people. I didn't realize it was that many. So, wow. And I think we don't talk about how expensive it is and how stressful it is to try to regularize your status and still be caught in this sort of nowhere land as a permanent state of being. Horrifying. Andrea asks, how do you ensure safety for Latino immigrant workers given their vulnerability due to economic, cultural, and language barriers?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, safety, I would like to kind of maybe clarify a little bit. Safety in terms of like physical safety or economic safety. Could you like repeat the question again?
I think being prone to to employer abuses.
Yeah.
Wage theft, working conditions, so on.
Yeah, I think going back to the point that I was making, like you almost have to. I mean, we live in this world where just talking about again immigrants as a silo is not helpful anymore. You really need to raise the standards of workers everywhere, because that's going to kind of raise the standards for them as well as for others too. So really, what we need to do, I think, I know we're in such a difficult position when we talk about immigration, such a divisive point of view. So we really need to take a step back and broaden our horizon and say, okay, you know, one of my colleagues is writing about extreme heat and injuries in that occupations, and we're like, okay, if you improve the working conditions in all of these sectors that really experience these type of extreme heat fatalities because of it, then you are really talking about raising standards for everybody who works in those areas. So I think that's one of the ways to really kind of take a step back and make a case for occupation as a whole, but you know that you are going to impact a lot of people that are immigrants, that are Latinos, and other immigrants as well. So some of the policies are very, very specific to immigration, and that we will always fight for, but I think you can really get somewhere if you broaden your horizon and advocate for policies that impact a lot more people.
And I will add that there is a risk in this conversation, if I'm being very candid. Immigrants are more than just the workforce that they provide. And I think we see that with farm workers who perish in the fields in extreme heat, not to mention the 4 bridge workers that are immigrants that died in the tragic bridge accident. And also, like we see Republicans talk about, or sorry, we see others talk about the workforce and being concerned about immigrant children, and then we see states take away protections from children to work and are the same recent arrival children that are working, in fact, in very dangerous factories through the night. So there is a risk in having this conversation when we look at immigrants strictly through the prism of the work that they contribute to this country. Of course, they are people as well.
But look, I can imagine a scenario where in terrible conditions, horrifying work, if you went to the workplace, let's say they're doing asbestos abatement in an old apartment house, you go in, it's always all immigrant workers. And if you say, I'm going to save you, I'm going to get you out of this asbestos-filled place, this is terrible work, you should be doing it with proper equipment, they wouldn't be so happy that you're intruding on their lives
And their
and
livelihoods.
threatening their shot at making a living. How do you keep both those things in mind when you move ahead on some of these questions?
I mean, this is a reality we've faced over and over again. Oftentimes, where there is a real negotiation on immigration reform, there's a bait and switch. Oh, you gave us all the tough stuff on border. Now we were all for citizenship. Let's just say work permits, and that's dangled as a carrot. But you know, DACA recipients have been in a temporary status, and like I said, until now had access to the ACA. This is an aging population that needs Social Security benefits, that needs Medicaid and Medicare. So I think it is up to our legislators that are champions of the immigrant community to fight for better protections. It shouldn't come down to the undocumented immigrant having to choose between providing for their families and having a future here in the U.S.
And that aging population, keep in mind, also needs home health care workers who are disproportionately immigrant, disproportionately Latino, and terribly paid. It's one of the worst paid jobs in America.
And also the fastest growing, like one of the fastest growing. Like it's going to just balloon, because I did another research that looked at more nurses and healthcare, and it just blew my mind how fast that group is, like that occupation is growing, but also how like the need for it, like the need for protections is in that occupation, because it's personal, it's really under the radar, and even if there's violations, people don't report. It all comes down to not having papers or whatnot. It's just and not just like labor protections are just bad in general too, not just immigration specific. So yeah.
There's a beautiful irony in entering your late old age and finding your food being prepared, your meds being counted out, being bathed, and having as your companion someone you wouldn't even live next door to during another part in your life. Child labor was mentioned briefly, but I do want to get to a question on that. Several states have started to loosen the requirements. Hour requirements, time of day requirements, even occupational requirements that kept children out of the workforce. It sounds like we're moving backwards on this score. Is labor hunger so extreme in some of these places, or is this more of an ideological thing? What's going on there?
Well, there's one group we haven't spoken about much, which is asylum seekers. And there is actually a requirement that an asylum seeker cannot apply for work authorization until 6 months after they file their application for asylum. So in that time, asylum seekers coming with children, they don't have work authorization. They're trying to find work. It's quite a precarious situation where they're very vulnerable to being exploited by employers because it's not in the formal economy. And because it's such a precarious situation, I imagine a lot of these children are forced into labor as well. And so I think what we need to do is we need to really reconsider this requirement, the 6-month gap, and enable these asylum seekers to gain work authorization much quicker. And that would also, we're seeing a lot of pressure on shelters in many cities because these asylum seekers don't have work authorization and because they're on very low wages if they do work. So I think that's something we really need to look at alongside the undocumented spouses and dreamers. We also need to look at the asylum seekers and think about how they can contribute to our economy much quicker. I think that would be good for their security and also, of course, helping our economy.
There's a lot of talk in the current debates over immigration about the border, and it's often described as an open border. One question we've gotten from the floor, from Ruben, is there a role CPB can play in streamlining the work permit process for immigrant workers and handling them in a better and different way? There's a lot of anxiety right now about the work of CBP. How can it be improved?
Well, I would say that there's actually a pilot in Texas, I believe in El Paso, that is currently doing that. That there are CBP officers who are set up at the receiving shelters to expedite processing of folks so that they can get their work permit fairly quickly. I was recently at Eagle Pass and at a shelter. You know, it's a pass-through area for folks oftentimes because they are given transportation at the cost of the state of Texas. And so oftentimes they get to where they're going and then they have to manage a convoluted process. So, you know, we are seeing pilots through CBP that are managing that process in the front end for people who pass a positive credible fear interview in the asylum process.
Dulce asks, we're seeing more cities and states get involved in the immigration conversation. What is the role of these different levels of government in advocating and pushing for changes to how immigration is governed?
I think at the end of the day, the federal government needs to manage this. Like that's where it should happen. But since cities and states are receiving all these newer asylum seekers, they have had to kind of really orient themselves and understand who are arriving, what are their needs, because the needs are very different from what they're used to, and really set up a system to make sure that their cities are not overwhelmed. And because, you know, there's a lot of I think negative coverage in the media about when new arrivals come to the city and you know, they're taking away places to live, or there's strain on resources, and those are real too. The concerns are real because cities have, you know, certain budgets and they need to figure that out. The concerns are real, but what is also real is to receive these new arrivals in a very humanitarian way, because some cities, you know, and they're almost like, I think, figuring it out ad hoc, because there is just really not a lot of preparation for some of them. But bigger cities like New York, you know, they have, I think, Chicago, you know, they are like setting up a process to really process these, to receive these new asylum seekers and new immigrants in a more practical way, more in a way that feels welcome to them. And there are other cities like Denver and others that are trying to also developing their own system. And I think one danger of letting cities and states do what they want is it will be very, it won't be like standard. It will be different, it will look different. But I think more and more cities and states are trying to take it, many of them are taking it as an opportunity, taking it as like, okay, this is a shared responsibility. Like, how do we make sure these people are not just left uncared for? So I do think after, I think probably a year or so, there's more of that language. Housing is a big problem throughout all cities and states. So they're getting together and trying to figure out, trying to learn from each other, like what pitfalls are. How do you make sure that the environment is more positive, just the social environment as well?
The mayors of Washington, New York, and Chicago didn't ask to be pushed to the front line of this problem, but there they are.
Right.
Are they being actually hindered on purpose by elected officials in other places in the country?
Yes, and I would say we've also, I think there's another side of the coin here as well, that, you know, the governor of Texas has taken it upon himself to be the DHS of the border, which is an improper role for a governor and a state. And, you know, we saw that, you know, the National Guard there, they have the, what's it called, the concertina wire. And if they see someone get caught in it, their orders are to not interfere. And sometimes the high tide comes up and people unfortunately perish in that concertina wire. So there is, you know, a very cynical political undertone to this, because he is also using his own state resources to ship people to different cities. You know, when I went to the shelter, it was essentially like a free Amtrak station. They were given clothes, water, people who spoke Spanish, and then they had like a map of like, what city do you want to go to? Or you go to a Greyhound station, it costs you $1,000 for yourself to go to where your family might be if you're an asylum seeker coming to the border. But then there's other places like Portland, Maine, which they call the recent arrivals new Mainers. And Senator Collins often says, who is a Republican, I will say, that there is a resort and a restaurant and a hotel with asylum seekers. And they have a help wanted sign, and then they have like folks bringing food to the shelter. And she has a bill to expedite work permits and to get rid of that waiting period because one, they want to be welcoming, and two, it is helpful to their local economies. So I think, you know, we have people who use it for political advantage and others who have seen this as an opportunity to have new people come and enrich their communities.
Is there any place that's doing it right or better? Americans sometimes are reluctant to look to other countries for models. Leah mentioned earlier Canada benefiting from American mistakes, but I'm wondering if there are receiving countries that have aspects to their system that the United States might copy or at least be informed by.
Well, I would just say that the United States is under pressure like no other country is in terms of the migration that is coming to the southern border. We're seeing, you know, there are pull factors. People think the United States is the land of opportunity, but there are push factors, climate migration, and people are coming from all across the world. It used to be mainly Mexico. Then it was, you know, a lot of people from South America. Now people are coming across the world to the United States, and I think, you know, we certainly can look to other countries, but we also have to recognize that this is really difficult for the United States. And we need Congress to actually pass a border legislation. We had a bipartisan border deal a few months ago. It would have helped. It would have provided more resources, which obviously we need if we're gonna continue to see the number of people we're seeing. It would have included some changes to the asylum process. But you know, it failed due to political reasons. So what we need is for our policymakers to look past the politics and to actually, I mean, when we have a bipartisan border deal, to actually pass it. So I think it's not so much learning from other countries necessarily, it's actually just executing on what we know we need and looking past the politics.
And I'd give the White House a lot of credit in this respect. They have done a great deal of work to work through the Western Hemisphere. We are seeing border numbers essentially flat, and that's because of their work with Mexico, the recent conversation with AMLO. But places like Costa Rica, part of our discussion, the U.S. involvement through the Department of State and others, are large receiving countries in the region from Venezuela that are coming through the Darien Gap. And you know, there is no silver bullet to this issue. It is a complicated global issue, and you know, the administration has been working within the region to manage flows and to provide economic opportunity for those that are coming from other countries within the region as well.
Final thoughts?
Yeah, just to add to, I think one of the things that we looked at what the administration was doing well, especially in the regional sense, was I think it was last year, it was the first time in the history that U.S. was part of a signatory in LA Declaration, and it was initiated by U.S. U.S. had never been part of all of these. I think it was about 22 countries that came together and thought about, okay, what do we do about this migration? How do we manage it? How do we make sure that our policies are aligned with each other so that we're not faced with a humanitarian crisis, not just at our border. That is a very, very small, narrow lens to look at. The whole region is experiencing this type of humanitarian crisis at their doorstep. And like Leah said, Costa Rica and other countries, Colombia, they're huge. They're receiving like 2 or 3 or 4 million people and managing it well and like regularizing them. It's really, if you actually get out of US politics and look at what these other countries are doing for people who are arriving there at their border, it's quite great. Like work permits, making sure that these large populations are really included in the economy because it's good for them. That's the scenario that they go with. But just to kind of want to put a pin on the LA Declaration because that's like a one-of-a-kind agreement that US kind of led that we've never really been part of before.
There are 3 things a moderator has to do: keep it moving, keep it interesting, and get off on time. And I am about to do all 3. Please thank Leah Parada of the Immigration Hub, Silva Matema of the Center for American Progress, and Jack Malday from the Bipartisan Policy Center.
Thank you.